Owning a massive historic fortress is a dream for many. What if you could finally acquire one for less than the price of your morning coffee? But before you pack your bags, you need to know the terrifying truth. These incredibly cheap properties hide incredibly dark secrets, crumbling foundations, and unforgiving spirits that refuse to leave. Let's take a deep dive into 20 amazing castles around the world that no one wants to buy, not even for a single dollar.
Number 20, Tiffany Castle. If you drive through the Pendleton Heights neighborhood of Kansas City, you'll notice something that's completely out of place. Tiffany Castle is an imposing Tudor-style fortress built in 1909 by Dr. Flavel Tiffany. He was a prominent local ophthalmologist who had a desire to bring a piece of Old England to Missouri. Instead of a traditional structure, he built the entire building from scratch, using solid stone walls quarried locally, while pouring incredibly heavy reinforced concrete for the roof and floors. At the time, its construction cost over $75,000, which would translate to millions of dollars today. The doctor even added a spiral staircase inside a tower, leading to a rooftop garden that can accommodate 500 guests. But buying this enormous property today is a huge gamble for any modern homeowner. The heavy concrete roof and thick stone walls make upgrading the plumbing and electrical systems an absolute nightmare. Any attempt to run new wiring or fix a leaky pipe will require breaking through solid, unbreakable rock and steel. Buyers glance at renovation estimates and immediately run for the hills. You're essentially buying a beautiful concrete bunker that aggressively resists every attempt at modernization or renovation. The exorbitant cost of maintaining this place in habitable condition is precisely the reason it remains here, waiting for someone with the courage and audacity to take it on. Number 19, Himeshi Castle.
3. Widely known as the White Heron, Himeshi Castle is officially the largest and most spectacular fortress in all of Japan. It is an astonishing complex of massive proportions consisting of exactly 83 gleaming white wooden buildings. Because it is highly classified as a priceless national treasure, it can legally never be sold to a private buyer. But even if the Japanese government offered it for a single dollar, absolutely no one could afford the exorbitant and constant daily maintenance it requires. The entire complex is built entirely of solid wood, which means it is constantly under threat from devastating fires, deep structural rot, and extremely aggressive termites. Every few decades, the entire castle must undergo a massive and utterly exhaustive restoration process. Highly skilled workers must meticulously replace the heavy roof tiles and flawlessly reapply the gleaming white stucco, all by hand.
The most recent restoration took more than 5 intensely long years and cost an absolutely massive fortune to complete successfully. Owning Himeji would mean employing an army of highly traditional Japanese artisans year-round just to keep the building standing against the elements. You would spend millions on authentic materials alone. It is an architectural masterpiece of incalculable value, but also an absolutely bottomless financial pit. However, wood isn't the only building material that eventually fails over time. Sometimes even stone castles, though heavily reinforced, simply explode.
Number 18, a French provincial chateau. In the heart of Texas lies a sprawling estate known as the Lodge at Hunter's Creek. This structure combines the heavy stone walls of a Scottish Gothic fortress with the elegant soaring spires of a traditional French chateau. A few years ago, it came on the market for the staggering sum of $59,999,999. The sheer scale of this place is truly terrifying for the average buyer. We're talking thousands of square feet of custom-made woodwork, imported stone, and vaulted ceilings that echo as you walk through its expansive hallways. The property even boasts its own private security complex and incredibly sophisticated water systems to maintain all the sprawling gardens. So why doesn't some bored billionaire buy it immediately? Because the pert people with $60 million to spend typically want to design their own custom homes completely from scratch. Buying someone else's specific architectural fantasy means you're totally stuck with their exact vision, their exact layout, and their exact taste. The property taxes alone could easily fund a small town for a year. One really has to wonder how long a mega mansion like this can remain completely empty before maintenance costs start eating away at the very foundation.
And speaking of crumbling foundations, our next stop takes us to a remote island where a single dollar could completely ruin the rest of your life. Number 17, Kinloch Castle. Located on the remote Isle of Room in Scotland, Kinloch Castle is a true masterpiece of severe architectural decay. Built in 1897 by a wealthy aristocrat, its original cost was the equivalent of $30 million today. Fast forwarding to recent years, this sprawling Victorian residence was once offered for sale for exactly $1. More recently, the property was put back on the market with offers exceeding £750,000. A prominent billionaire even attempted to purchase it, but backed out of the deal after encountering endless red tape and realizing the true extent of the devastating damage. The building currently suffers from massive roof leaks, severe dry rot destroying its internal structure, and a relentless infestation of woodworm devouring the historic timbers. Repairing it would involve shipping every piece of building material and every skilled worker across the turbulent ocean to a small, remote, and completely isolated island. Millions of dollars would be spent just coordinating the vessels needed to transport all the scaffolding and equipment. The logistics alone would completely drain your bank account before you'd even finished repairing that sagging roof. Undertaking such a massive project is, essentially, financial suicide for anyone without an unlimited budget. But Kinloch isn't the only historic property being practically given away to anyone naive enough to accept it. In fact, the Italian government has a real estate offer that sounds even more suspicious. Number 16, Castello di Blera. Italy is famous for its incredible history, and recently the government has started practically handing over old buildings to anyone willing to take them on. Castello di Blera is a prime example. This 11th century stone fortress was recently put up for sale on the open market for exactly €1, which is roughly $1.20. For that small sum, you get an ancient defensive tower, a beautiful historic courtyard, and panoramic views of the lush Italian countryside. It sounds like the absolutely perfect European getaway for a savvy investor, but there's a catch that completely ruins the fantasy. When you buy the castle, you're legally obligated to fully restore the property within exactly 3 years of the purchase date. You can't do the hard work yourself on the weekends. You have to hire specialized historical architects, use incredibly expensive period materials, and comply with countless historic preservation laws designed to protect the national heritage. A simple €1 purchase instantly becomes a multi-million euro obligation that will consume all your free time. If you fail to complete the grueling work before the deadline, you lose the property entirely and walk away with absolutely nothing. It's a terrifying financial time bomb, and if you think spending a single euro on a dilapidated building is risky, wait until you spend a little more on another Italian ruin. Number 15, Castello di Montefiore. Also located high in the Italian hills, Castello di Montefiore presents a slightly different but equally terrifying real estate trap. This fortress dates back to the 12th century and features a beautiful, sprawling courtyard as well as an imposing defensive stone tower. This historic property recently came on the market for €95,000, which is roughly $112,000. That, in fact, seems like a pretty reasonable price for an authentic medieval fortress, right? The main problem is that the structure at this point is basically a glorified pile of loose stones. It requires such extensive renovation work that you are essentially rebuilding a massive castle completely from scratch, while navigating Italy's notoriously strict heritage laws. You can't just hire a cheap local contractor to pour some modern concrete and call it a day. Every single stone must be treated with absolute care, documented, and replaced to perfection. Hauling heavy construction equipment up the narrow, winding Italian hills is a logistical nightmare that easily doubles the total cost of the project. Buyers consistently fall in love with the highly romantic notion of owning one, but the harsh reality of construction costs quickly scares them off. But what if the reason a castle absolutely refuses to sell has nothing to do with money and everything to do with its previous occupants refusing to leave? Number 14, Charleville Castle. Deep in the dark forests of Ireland, Charleville Castle is a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture. It boasts towering turrets, long, dark stone corridors, and a deeply frightening history that sends wealthy buyers running for the hills. Several decades ago, the financial burden became so overwhelming that the desperate owners auctioned off the entire contents of the castle just to survive mounting debt. The property requires immense daily maintenance, but the real problem preventing any normal sale is the incredibly intense paranormal activity. Locals and professional paranormal investigators consider it one of the most haunted places in all of Europe. The main ghost is that of a young girl named Harriet, who tragically lost her life centuries ago after falling down the massive oak staircase. Visitors constantly report hearing a child singing in the completely empty hallways, or feeling icy hands aggressively tugging at their dancing clothes. Even so, you would have to live with the constant and unsettling supernatural activity. Real estate agents already have enough difficulty selling an ordinary modern house with a rundown kitchen, let alone a massive fortress with a very active resident ghost. Living there means accepting that you are never truly alone. But Charleville is far from the only European castle that harbors intensely dark secrets that completely destroy its property value. Number 13, Castello Alamanda. Off the coast of Italy, on the sunny and rocky island of Sicily, lies a property that became famous almost overnight. Known locally as Casa Alamanda, this historic building was bought for roughly €2 and completely renovated for a popular British television program starring Amanda Holden. After filming wrapped and the production crew packed up, it was put on the open market for €145,000. It boasts a beautiful walled courtyard and stunning, uninterrupted views of the deep blue Mediterranean Sea. So why is this beautifully renovated, utterly famous house struggling to find a permanent buyer? Because television renovations focus entirely on the visual and ignore long-term survival. The reality of maintaining an ancient stone building isolated on a remote island involves contending with harsh sea winds, constant salt corrosion, and a complete lack of reliable modern infrastructure. When the plumbing inevitably fails, or the heavy stone begins to crack, finding a highly skilled repairer on a rural Sicilian island is incredibly difficult and extremely expensive. You're buying a beautiful holiday home that aggressively demands a full-time property manager just to keep it from falling apart while you're away. But at least Castello Alamanda isn't actively collapsing into the icy depths of the ocean, which is exactly what's happening to our next location. Number 12, Hurst Castle. Located right on the very exposed southern coast. At the heart of England, Hurst Castle was built with great solidity by King Henry Othon to be a completely impenetrable artillery fortress. For hundreds of years, it managed to survive centuries of intense warfare with ease, violently repelling enemy fleets and standing as an imposing symbol of formidable British military might. But it could by no means withstand the relentless power of water. Today, no one can buy this incredible property because the sea is swallowing it whole. A few years ago, a huge section of the historic massive stone wall completely collapsed into the dark ocean after a particularly strong storm battered the coast. Aggressive coastal erosion is occurring at such a terrifyingly rapid rate that English heritage has to spend millions of dollars just to prevent the remaining walls from sliding straight into the deep mud. You couldn't legitimately give away this incredible castle even for free. Any private buyer would immediately be held fully responsible for holding back the entire ocean, which is a brutal fight you will always lose. Attempting to build a modern retaining wall to protect the foundations would bankrupt even the wealthiest investors. It's a stark warning that nature always aggressively reclaims its territory, no matter how thick you build the walls. And speaking of fiercely clinging to territory, our next castle, an imposing fortress, has remained entirely under the control of the same family for centuries. But this has come at a very high price. Number 11, Eltz Castle. Tucked away in a lush, leafy valley in Germany, Eltz Castle looks like something straight out of a beautiful fairy tale. This castle features soaring spires reaching for the sky, richly detailed timber-framed walls, and a truly spectacular stone bridge leading directly to its majestic main entrance. Most astonishing about Eltz is that it has been owned and managed by the same family, without interruption, for 33 consecutive generations. It has never been destroyed in battle and has never been sold on the open market. But if it ever came on the market, it would instantly become a terrifying financial black hole for the new owner. Maintaining a massive medieval structure in a very wet, shaded river valley requires a massive, uninterrupted flow of cold, hard cash.
The family has to rely heavily on the steady sale of tourist tickets just to keep the enormous roof from collapsing on them. Critical structural maintenance, advanced humidity control for the priceless ancient artifacts, and constant, exhausting stonework repairs cost millions of dollars every decade. Every stone requires specialized care. No private buyer could reasonably afford to live there without turning their tranquil home into a massive, noisy public museum, simply to cover expenses. Number 10. Chillingham Castle. Located far north in Northumberland, England, Chillingham Castle has a deeply unsettling reputation that completely destroys any realistic chance of a normal property sale. It is widely known as the most haunted castle in all of Great Britain, and for good reason. For centuries, this imposing fortress witnessed incredibly brutal and bloody border battles between the English and the ferocious Scottish forces. It boasts a completely intact and truly gruesome torture chamber, where countless prisoners met a very dark end, leaving an indelible stain on the history of this building that can never be washed away. The current owner bought it decades ago and spent a great deal of time trying to restore it properly, but the dark, heavy energy never left the halls. Visitors consistently report hearing agonizing screams echoing aggressively from the cold dungeon, and frequently seeing the terrifying ghost of the Blue Boy manifesting directly in the main bedrooms. Imagine trying to successfully sell a massive multi-million-dollar luxury estate where the main selling point is a dark room designed for pure human suffering. Absolutely no amount of fresh white paint or modern lighting can hide the heavy, deeply oppressive atmosphere that hangs in the air. Living there means sleeping with one eye open every night. But as terrifying as aggressive ghosts are, dealing with angry local governments and crumbling stone walls might be even worse. Number 9. Kimball Castle. Perched atop a steep hill overlooking Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, Kimball Castle sat completely empty and rotting away for exactly 60 years. Built by a very wealthy railroad magnate, the massive estate was eventually bequeathed to a small nature charity with a $400,000 cash endowment, but the money vanished completely. The charity dissolved completely, and the enormous stone castle fell into utter and devastating ruin. It quickly became a huge and costly legal headache for the small local village. Recently, an ambitious buyer finally stepped in with a grand plan to turn it into a beautiful luxury wedding venue. But here's the hitch that ruins the dream. The massive structure is so incredibly degraded that building experts estimate it would take a massive injection of $10 million in cash just to save the building from total collapse. Because absolutely no one has that kind of extra money to invest in a stone house that's completely ruined and decayed, the new plan is simply to demolish most of the structure and leave only a few crumbling walls standing to serve as essential historical relics. It's legitimately cheaper to bluntly demolish much of the castle than to attempt to repair and fully restore it. Number 8, we have Granite Loma. Located on the frigid shores of Lake Superior in Michigan, Granite Loma is officially the largest log cabin estate in the entire country. Built between 1919 and 1927, this sprawling property sits on an incredibly vast 5,000 acres of dense private forest. The original owner, a wealthy American businessman named Louis Graveret Kaufman, wanted the ultimate summer home. He hired 300 local craftsmen to build a colossal wooden palace on a massive steel frame and a concrete foundation nearly 6 feet thick. He initially listed it for a staggering $40 million. However, no one was interested. Eventually, the price dropped to $19.5 million, but it still struggled to find a single buyer. One might wonder why anyone would turn down a luxury lodge with its own private peninsula, a 60-foot great room, and 26 enormous stone fireplaces. The truth boils down to the astronomical heating and maintenance costs required to prevent a giant wooden structure from rotting in the brutal northern winters. Each log, imported directly from Oregon to withstand the elements, requires constant and very expensive care. Heating the enormous rooms costs a small fortune every month. It makes you realize that owning a giant rustic palace is a massive financial trap. Number 7, Bannerman Castle. If you take a slow boat down the deep Hudson River in New York, you'll easily spot the jagged, crumbling stone ruins. Bannerman Castle stands alone on a small, rocky island. In 1900, a successful Scottish-American businessman bought the remote island for exactly $600. He built a massive, ornate castle specifically to serve as a gigantic warehouse for his extremely dangerous military surplus business. The entire heavy building was crammed to the roof with highly explosive munitions and volatile black powder. In 1920, tons of that stored gunpowder accidentally detonated, violently blasting a huge hole right through the side of the heavy stone fortress. The building was quickly abandoned, and decades later, in 2009, a large portion of the remaining outer shell completely collapsed into rubble. Today, the property is completely unsellable. It is absolutely uninhabitable. You can barely walk safely near the heavy walls. It urgently requires hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding for strict conservation just to prevent the remaining walls from violently collapsing on tourists taking boat tours around the island. Acquiring Bannerman Island simply means buying an extremely dangerous pile of exploding rocks. Speaking of truly terrible financial decisions, let's now travel north to a property of nothing in Canada. Number 6, Casa Loma. Located right in the heart of modern Toronto stands a massive and meticulously detailed Gothic Revival mansion called Casa Loma. It was built in the early 1910s by Sir Henry Pellet, a prominent Canadian financier with an immense fortune. He invested absolutely everything he owned in building his dream castle, his masterpiece. He filled it with intricate, dark, secret passageways, a colossal multi-level library, and vast, sumptuous gardens that stretched endlessly, exuding the opulence of European royalty. But the sheer scale of his wild ambition led to utter financial ruin. Exorbitant heating bills during the frigid, harsh Canadian winters were astronomical, and mandatory property taxes spiraled out of control. Sir Henry was left completely bankrupt and had to aggressively auction off all his prized possessions just to survive the financial blow. The city council eventually seized the massive stone castle because he couldn't pay the enormous back taxes. Today, it functions strictly as a busy public museum and a huge daily event space. Casa Loma stands as a stark, stony warning to anyone who truly believes that building a colossal castle in a modern city is a good idea. Local taxes alone will completely drain you, but those taxes are absolutely nothing compared to the profoundly dark and murky history that lurks within our next hefty fortress. Number 5, the Castle of Good Hope. Located in the heart of Cape Town, the enormous Castle of Good Hope is officially the oldest colonial building in all of South Africa. Solidly built by the Dutch East India Company in the late 17th century, this towering fortress with its incredibly thick walls has a profoundly dark and utterly violent past. It served primarily as a strict military stronghold and a brutal prison where countless people suffered intensely behind its heavy stone walls. Today, absolutely no one in their right mind would want to live here because it is considered by most to be the most haunted place in the entire country. Night guards constantly report hearing the terrifying, agonizing screams of an unseen woman who roams the dark lower corridors. The main bell tower was completely sealed off because a distraught soldier tragically ended his life while ringing the heavy bell. Terrified locals claim it still rings alone in the pitch black of night. You have a huge, icy military bunker steeped in centuries of absolute, pure pain and severe suffering. It's not exactly the kind of relaxing place you'd want to have your morning coffee. Number 4, Chateau Frontenac. Majestically dominating Quebec City's beautiful skyline, Chateau Frontenac officially holds the impressive record as the most photographed hotel in the world. It looks exactly like a French castle of massive, soaring proportions, complete with heavy green copper roofs and enormous defensive turrets that seem to touch the clouds. Although it's an incredibly successful luxury hotel, the idea of a single private buyer successfully acquiring it is utterly ludicrous. The enormous building boasts over 600 meticulously detailed rooms, vast ballrooms, and an incredible amount of aging plumbing and complex electrical systems concealed behind its heavy, historic walls. Maintaining the massive copper roofs in pristine condition, heating the immense structure during Canada's brutal, frigid winters, and paying the numerous staff requires a constant and aggressive flow of millions of dollars each month. If the hotel's total revenue dips for even a single month, daily maintenance costs skyrocket and spiral completely out of control. It's a beautiful historic landmark, but owning it successfully requires the massive financial backing of a huge corporate conglomerate. Number 3. In third place, Predhama Castle.
Nestled among the towering mountains of Slovenia, Predhama Castle is a true architectural marvel. It's built directly into the gaping mouth of a massive cave, perched halfway up a towering vertical rock face. It looks impressive from the outside, but actively living there is a complete daily nightmare, because all the back walls of the main rooms are literally just raw cave rock. The entire enormous castle is freezing, damp, and impossible to heat. Frigid water constantly drips down the heavy stone walls, destroying the wooden furniture and freezing the unfortunate occupants. In the 15th century, a famous knight named Erosim used it as an impenetrable fortress to survive a massive and bloody siege. He used a deep, secret tunnel hidden deep within the dark cave to sneak out and gather vital supplies. But today, the lack of modern insulation and the constant oppressive dampness make it uninhabitable for any modern buyer. You could spend an absolutely immense fortune on industrial dehumidifiers and still freeze to the bone every night. Number 2, Jauska Castle. In the dark and isolated forests of the Czech Republic, exactly 47 kilometers north of Prague, rise the incredibly heavy stone walls of Jauska Castle. At first glance, it seems quite ordinary, but the architecture is entirely flawed. It was built without any source of fresh water, without a functioning kitchen, and strictly without any strategic defensive value. Many of the heavy exterior windows are fake, just fragile panes of glass perfectly fitted into massive stone walls. So, what was the real reason for its construction? According to local legends, whispered with great insistence and mystery, the enormous and majestic castle wasn't erected to keep dangerous human enemies away. It was built to keep demonic forces locked inside. The heavy stone fortress sits directly above a bottomless pit that terrified the locals, who believed it was an active gateway to hell. The enormous stone chapel was built directly over the immense dark hole to seal it, and the heavy defensive stone walls face strictly inwards. Absolutely no one wants to invest in a massive building where the original clever architects were literally trying to contain dark demonic forces. But there is one enormous castle that is even more terrifying than a bottomless pit. Number 1, Leap Castle. Taking the absolute top spot on our list is Leap Castle in Ireland, considered by many to be the most terrifying, cursed, and unsellable property on the planet. Built in the 13th century, this massive stone fortress has a dark history steeped in pure violence. The most infamous room is the blood-stained chapel, where an aggressive man shot his own terrified brother, who was serving as a priest, right at the stone high altar. When modern renovations were done in the early 1920s, terrified workers discovered a trap door hidden behind the massive chapel wall. He fell instantly straight into a vast, horrific, spike-strewn dungeon, where helpless prisoners were thrown to their violent deaths. Terrified workers hauled 3 enormous cartloads of razor-sharp human bones out of that single dark hole. Today, the imposing castle is owned by a dedicated man named Sean Ryan, who allows visitors to explore its vast grounds. But he constantly faces extreme paranormal activity, including the terrifying elemental, a dark, ancient spirit that smells of rotting flesh. Even if this property were offered for a single measly $1, no one in their right mind would ever buy it.